Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, after this warm-up, we're ready for a story. Every one of us, when does an author become an author? Do you become an author when your book is published? Do you become an author when you write your book? Or do you become an author when the story starts? Something to think about. I believe that every life is a story. Every life that we live is a story, and as we live the life, we are co-authors. In fact, we don't start the writing of the story. The story starts without us. But once we're in it, we co-author. And we were very happy when Eddy let us know that he would be here. This evening is actually in the planning for like 4 years. We had something called COVID in between. I don't know if you heard about that. But when Eddy told us that he's going to be in this part of the world at this time of the year, my first reaction, it's definitely an inspiring story, but we like something uplifting, and a Holocaust story on the high holidays. Yeah. We have other days for that, was my original thought. But then I realized, no, that Eddy's story is, as he put it on the cover of the book, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. Eddy proves with his story that we are co-authors and that we choose, we make the choices. And the choices that we make affect the continuation of the narrative of the script, and that's exactly what the high holiday period is all about. We're starting a new year, we turned a page, and now we're starting a new year, and it's for us to make, at every moment, every given moment, we have Natati lefanecha et hachaim ve'et hatov. The Almighty says, I've placed before you life and the good and the opposite, and it's for you to choose. And the Bible encourages us, ubacharta b'chaim, choose life. So that's why we call this evening Choose Life. Without further ado, Eddy Boas.
First of all, I apologize. I can't sing, I can't make music, and I can't dance. I can speak, so I hope you don't mind if I just speak. And the first thing I'm going to ask you, en ik zal het in Hollands zeggen, kan ik mijn jas afnemen? Rabbi, thank you very, very much for inviting me to come to Den Haag. As you said, this started 4 years ago. We planned it for 2020. But then in Australia, can you all hear me without a microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. But then COVID came in and we're doing it today. My story is how we, my father, my mother, my brother, and I survived the Holocaust. And you will find I don't hold back. The Holocaust must education, sorry if I stand in your way, go over here a bit. No, it's all right. The Holocaust must never be forgotten. It must be taught in schools. And in Australia, I have had meetings with ministers of education about making it part of the curriculum. I was invited to speak at Parliament House in New South Wales, the state of New South Wales. So, that's my story. I shall start with my family. I was born on the 26th of January 1940. That was 5 months or so before the Germans invaded Holland. In those days, my parents had lived, both families had lived in Holland since the 1700s for 200 years. And they thought that they were Dutch Jews. My father had a shop in Amsterdam, a fruit shop. He was a bike racer. He joined the Army National Service in the cavalry. And as you hear my story, you'll find that horses are going to play a very big part in my life. That's my father's family. My grandfather, who died before the war. My grandmother, who was murdered in Sobibor. My father, and my mother, and my father's sister, who was murdered in Auschwitz. That's my mother's family. My mother had 3 sisters, Lintje, Mietje, Rietje. And with her brothers, Hartog and Jonas. My mother dancing. My mother was the first, as far as I could do research, woman, I'm not sure if the Hague or Netherlands, who drove a truck delivering fruit. Her father had a wholesale business in fruit. That's how my father and my mother met. My father came down from Amsterdam to buy fruit, met my mother. And my mother also was the first lady or second lady to ride a motorbike. She was an outgoing lady. The police always talked to her, which came in handy in life a little bit later. They got married in 1934. Sorry, I just got this on. The bridesmaid and the boy, I don't know what to call them, both were murdered. They were children of my mother's family. My father in the army, that's a medal. In 2009, when I started writing my book in 2002. My mother passed away in 2001. En ik sprak altijd Nederlands met haar, maar sinds dan heb ik nooit Nederlands gesproken. Ik heb niemand mee te spreken. Except you people.
And me on the golf course.
Ah, okay. Ronald, how are you? Sorry.
Oh, good.
Gentleman from my golf club in Sydney. Came to live in Australia. Hollander.
Yeah, just took a special flight just to meet this. I'm just kidding.
I wrote to the Dutch. I wrote a lot of letters to the Dutch governments over the years. I started writing my book in 2002. I finished writing my book in 2015. It took me 13 years because one of the things I learned in life, get your facts right. And I would write to the government of Holland, Yad Vashem, the Red Cross, the International Tracing. You ask a question, you get 5 different answers. They must be Jewish, that's what I thought. So you had to find out the facts. You couldn't say something happened on the 23rd, it happened on the 27th. And I engaged an investigator in Holland for a number of years to make sure that I get my facts right. No Dutch government will ever argue with me when I ask them questions about things, which I've done a lot of. My father in the army. My father fought at the Gebberberg, and when it was overrun on the 15th of May, he stole a jeep and drove back to Den Haag. That's my brother, who was born in 1935. His 2 sons are right here. And my mother, of course, that's where we lived. 39 Kruijenhofstraat. I've been there, take some photos. It's still the same. Looks the same to me. Now, when the Germans took over, and most of you know the story, so I'm not going to bore you, life changed for Jews. My parents were no longer Dutch Jews, they were Jews. The Dutch government, the bureaucracy, handed the Germans the census list of 1939 to show them where all the Jews lived. They had an easy time, they've got a list like that. And you all know, forbidden for Jews, the Star of David. My father managed to get a job at the Jewish Council for a little while. Then, the story of in Den Haag. We lived in the flat in Kranhorstad. My father hardly ever went out except at night sometimes. He was a big man. My brother Sansa and my son over there is. And he was noticeable, so he stayed home. My mother went out to do the once at a time when you're allowed to go out to the shops to buy fruit and so on. And clothing and all this. There were razzias on the street. We stayed out of the trouble. My parents' brothers and sisters all went and reported to the Germans by the Joodse Raad, told them to go. They went, none of them came back. My mother one day went out shopping, 1943 it was, and she bumped into this policeman called Derek. And Derek and her had a bit of a chat. My mother went to a shop called The Wow in the city or somewhere. And as she came out with me in the pram, my brother holding her hand, Derek was standing there, and she said to Derek, "What are you doing here, Derek?" He said, "Susan," that's the name, Sarah, Susan, "don't talk, don't look up, keep your eye on the pram, hold boy's hand." As we're walking along, back to the Kranhofstraat, there was a razzia, and NSB'ers at a roadblock, and called out to Derek, "Good catch there, Derek," a young woman with two young children. Derek said to my mother, "Don't look up." He took us back to our flat and stayed all night. Now, you will hear me talk about the Dutch police. I'm a great believer in life. There are more good people in this world than bad people. There were plenty of bad Dutch policemen. Plenty. I say, a story came out recently, Who Betrayed Anne Frank? Okay. I wrote to the film director when he was making the movie. I said, "You don't have to make a movie out of that. Dutch bureaucracy, Dutch police, and Dutch neighbours. They're the only people that betrayed the Jews. Nobody else. And same with Anne Frank. It's the neighbours. Now, it's all very well, in my opinion, to fantasize who betrayed Anne Frank. And I've had correspondence with the Frank Foundation, and they agree with me in Switzerland about this. On the 28th of September 1943, our front door was knocked in. A Dutch Nazi and a German policeman, we were on the second floor of the flat, broke her house. I began to cry. I was only 3 years old. My brother was 8 years old. And my mother came out the bedroom and threw a can of talcum powder at the Nazi, Dutch Nazi, and he told her, "You make the floor dirty." And my mother said, "The only dirty thing in this room is you," and he hit it at the right. And that's the spirit my mother showed right through the Holocaust. They kicked us out, they pushed us down the stairs. Downstairs waiting was a truck, surrounded by Dutch police, Dutch neighbours, put us in the truck, took us to the Hollands 4, and then we sent by train to Westerbork. We arrived there on the morning of 28-29. I'd let you read this. Most of you know where Westerbork is, I'm quite sure. My father was given the job of collecting food from the farms around Westerbork in a Western cart. We were in Westerbork from October October 1 to 1 February 1945. October 1, 1943 to, 1944, let me start again. We were in Westerbork, October 1943 to 1 February 1944. We were there 4 months. We were on the train to Bergen-Belsen. What happened was, every Monday night, the Germans would put a list for the trains that were departing for the concentration camps. One day my father came home and he heard that we were on a train to Bergen-Belsen. My mother said to him, go and see the Germans. I don't want to go to Bergen-Belsen, I want to go to Auschwitz. Well, nobody knew anything, see? The Jews, when it all started, most Jews thought that they were going to be there till the end of the war and then go back to their homes. But then the rumours started to go around about these trains going. And my father went to the Germans, and that's the first time and the only time the Germans made the correct decision, because they told my father to get lost, you're going to Bergen-Belsen. If they had agreed with them, I don't think I'd be standing here in front of you. That, we, in the barrack number 70, that's the layout of Westerbork, that's the bunks. If you read this carefully, we all know that 107,000 Dutch Jews were sent to concentration camp and only 5,000 came back. But if you look at the breakdown, look how many out of 34,000 survived, 18,000 only in Sobibor. These figures, in my opinion, have an impact. Bergen-Belsen, 2050 survived out of 3,751. I'll give you the explanation a bit later on. You know the story. My family, my father's family, 37 murdered, 2 survived, my father and a cousin, my mother.
So could you speak a bit louder and
Okay, yeah,
please?
sorry.
Thank you.
Aye, sorry about that. Yeah, my mother's family, 26. My mother's the only one that survived. So, I never had a grandma, never had an auntie, never had an uncle, never had a cousin. So Bergen-Belsen was broken up into 4 main camps. I'm not rushing, but we do have to go through a long story to tell you. I'll go to Star Camp, which was the camp where the Jews were held. Now, some genius of the German decided that they're going to have 30,000 Jews in a camp to be exchanged with diplomats or other Germans in countries like America, England, that were not at war with Germany. Only 200, I was talking to a gentleman earlier tonight who was telling me about his story, and I think it's related to the 200, or one of the 200 people that were actually exchanged. And the Star Camp held 6,000 Dutch Jews, and only 200 in total were exchanged. Now, the men's camp, women's camp, they're all the different camps. That's the layout of Bergen-Belsen. You can see in the bottom there, my mother, my brother, and I were in barrack 22. My father was in barrack 11, and that was Star Camp there. The food in Bergen-Belsen wasn't very good, as you can imagine. That's the layout of the camp. It started off as a POW camp in 1939, 1940, mainly for Russian soldiers, and 20,000 odd Russian soldiers died in Bergen-Belsen during the winter. That's what it looked like. And that's how it ended up when the British arrived. That's a photo taken by the British. Now, my father's job was to have a horse and cart, go around the camp and pick up the dead bodies off the ground and out of the barracks and meet the trains that came from Auschwitz and other places. He was given 2 horses to look after, and he went around the camp doing exactly that. It was not a pleasant job, but it turned out to be advantageous. You can see there the numbers that actually died before the British liberated, and then slowed down when the British crossed. Now the main reason for the death in Bergen-Belsen was starvation and typhus. The German commander, Joseph Kramer, decided that in early October that he stopped feeding the prisoners of Bergen-Belsen. And food became scarce and scarce as time went on. The British surrounded Bergen-Belsen around about April 1945. I was 5 years old, my brother was nearly 10. And they did a deal with the Germans that there won't be any fighting because the Germans were dying of typhus and the British didn't want to get infected, but as it turned out, many British soldiers died of typhus. The British burned Bergen-Belsen down. There's nothing left of Bergen-Belsen. I went there once with my sons, Philip here, and my son in Australia, back in 1996 I think it was, but there's nothing really much to see except the train tracks and things like that. Sorry, let's speak up. A lady called Olga Horrocks was both in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, and she says, people talked about Auschwitz of course, but there were so many other camps. Bergen-Belsen was surely one of the worst. They did not need gas chambers to murder Jews. Starvation took care of that. That's Joseph Kramer and Irma Grisse. Irma Grisse was the youngest female Nazi, 22 years old, to be found guilty, and she was executed in December by hanging, 1945. Kramer, the same thing. Grisse was my mother. My mother never spoke about the Holocaust, and I'll come to that a bit more. But one of the stories came out of this Grisse. In Australia we call them Boas, woman. Sorry about that. I know I've got to be careful what I say nowadays, but I'm talking about 1945, so I can say it, or 1940s. She was a terrible person. She had a dog that she let loose on sick Jews lying there. It's a terrible story. Okay, the British liberated Bergen-Belsen in 1945. You can all ask questions when I'm finished. I prefer to keep going and then you can ask any question you want. We were not there when the British entered Bergen-Belsen. Between April 6, 1945 and April 10, 1945, 3 trains left Bergen-Belsen with all the Jews from Star Camp, which included some Hungarians. The first train left either the 6th or the 7th of April, 1945, and had mainly Hungarians and some Dutch on them. This train was liberated after 1 week by the Americans. The second train and the destination of all 3 trains was Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic nowadays, and where we were supposed to be guests. The second train left about the 8th of April, mainly with Hungarians, a few Dutch on board as well. The third train we were on, which had 2,400 Dutch Jews on it and a handful of Hungarians. The first train was liberated by the Americans. The second train made it all the way to Theresienstadt, and the fate of the prisoners are unknown, but you can only imagine. The third train we were on, and there was no food on the trains. The third train was liberated by the Russians on the 23rd of April, 2 weeks after we were put on it. Now this train went zigzagging through Germany because the Allies were now bombing all the railway tracks, and the train went north, east, west, and stopped every once in a while for, because it couldn't go any further. What happened was that at that time, and was mainly the women that would jump off the train, go to all the farms around there and steal potatoes, whatever they turned out of the field, run back to the train, and that's how we sort of got fed. One day, my mother and a friend, Susan Bromet, son is there, Dave Bromet, sorry, grandson, Dave Bromet, son, unfortunately Dave the son can't be here, he's away. And my mother jumped off the train, and when they got back to the track, the train was gone. And they walked along the train and they came across a train standing there on the tracks. They jumped on and happened to be the second train, the Hungarian train. Later on, the next day maybe, they stopped next to another train, they looked out, it was our Dutch train. So they jumped off again, got onto the train and found my father and my brother, and myself of course, and Susan found her husband and her son, Dave, and daughter, Lydia. And both the daughter and the husband died on the train and were buried in Trebitz. The Russians liberated this train at Trebitz in eastern Germany on the 23rd. We've been on for 2 weeks. Now, in today's world, it's very difficult to say something nice about the Russians. But I'm telling you the truth, because I'm not the only person who's saying, my mother's not the only person who's saying, everybody who was on the train and that I got in contact with and still alive spoke very highly of the Russians. They took the Jews to Trebitz, put them up in homes, kicked the Germans out, or schools, like my family was, and told the Jews, go and steal what you want. Food, you go and get it. And whenever there was a dispute somewhere, the Russians would decide and the Jews failed. And this is not a make-believe story, that's a true story. That's the best I would say about the Russians. I'll go to the next one. Okay, so we're on this train. That's how we were loaded onto the train. That's when we were freed. That's the list that we were on. Okay, in Trebitz, there were many people dying of typhus, including the Russians. And the Russians decided that they would put all the sick people in a truck and take them to Riesa, further south to Leipzig and the Polish border. And we were put on the truck. I was getting typhus, my mother wasn't too well, my father wasn't too well, my brother was the only one who was really in a reasonable condition. We went to Riesa. Now we're talking mid-May 1945, and the war is about finished. We're in Riesa. My father decided there was no Dutch government that came looking for us. There was no Dutch government that went and found Jews in Trebitz till much later. I think it was the 31st of May or something like 1st of June. This became known as the Lost Train, but the Dutch government made no effort to find anybody. The Dutch government of the time, of course. My father decided we wanted to go back to Holland. He bribed Russian soldiers somehow or other to take us to the bridge, River Elbe, which divided us from the Americans and the English at Leipzig. Leipzig was on the other side. We were exchanged for 4 gypsies who wanted to come across to the east, and my family wanted to go to the west. We were put up in a school. My brother was the only one who was healthy. In the camp, as you all know, there are no shops. My mother had a boy growing 3 to 5. She had another son growing 8 to 10. You don't get any clothing like that. My father, because he cared for the horses, I must have missed a slide. He cared for the horses, could get hold of food meant for the horses. the Germans fed the horses better than they did the Jews. So my father went around the camp, and my brother was following him when he was in the horse and cart, and my father would say to him, I'm dropping this, in Dutch of course, and he would drop a potato there from the horses, a carrot. He would run to my mother, who would then exchange it for clothing with ladies whose son had died, young son of course, that's how we got clothing. Shoes were the most difficult of course, and again I'll be frank, my mother in winter of 1944-45, which was a terrible winter, my mother taught me and my brother, just pee on your feet to keep your toes warm. That's how we lived. So we finally got over to Leipzig. My brother went begging and stealing food or whatever he could find, and he was also in the camp. If a dead body lies around, he would steal clothing of it for meal himself. One day, a British soldier came across him, and the British soldier didn't speak Dutch. My brother didn't speak English, but somehow my brother got the British soldier to where we were. The British soldier, his name was Captain Douglas, he immediately organised for us to go to the British Field Hospital, and they made us better. We were there, we did medication, I survived, my mother survived, my brother survived, and my father survived. So our survival, I don't believe in luck. You create your own luck. Our survival, and according to the Red Cross and Yad Vashem, is unique. A family of 4 going into a concentration camp and coming out of a concentration camp together. Our survival comes back our father and horses and being able to steal the food of the horses to feed us, and the British soldier that my brother came across, who virtually saved my life, because typhus is an illness that if you survive 12 days, you live forever. So, I'll live forever. So we decided the British soldier decided to put us on a train to Holland. And we were given a registration card, Elias. My parents wanted to call me Elias when I was born on the 26th of January. But because of the war, they called me Eddy, because it's too much of a Jewish name. So my brother was Samuel, but they called him Boy. This caused me a heck of a lot of trouble in Australia, even up to last year, because I was known as Eddy everywhere. And the Dutch gave me a registration certificate, not a birth certificate, in 1946, I think, saying Elias Boas. So now I'm in Australia with a driver's license saying Eddy Boas and other things, bank accounts and Elias. It took me to last year to sort that out. So now I'm known as Elias Eddy Boas. So we're back now in Holland, and I'll rush through this a bit, and you can only ask any questions later because I don't want to send you to sleep by keeping you here too long. We're back in Holland. We were registered by the Red Cross along the border, come in the village in Limburg, I think it was. And we went back to The Hague by bus. My parents walked from Rijkswegplein, by the bus dropped us to a Klein Hostel, which is only a 5-10 minute walk. Knocked on the door and was told to get lost. And all our furniture, all our belongings were there. My parents were not rich people. My family was not rich. They were hard-working people, but they had furniture. And my mother tells the story later. As she walked down the street, she could see furniture and other things that belonged to us. So my parents went to the police. The police told them to get lost. My parents went to the House of Gemeente. The House of Gemeente told them to get lost. We had no money, no family, no home. My father knew there was a monastery along here somewhere, Rijkswegplein, towards the theatre. And they took us in for a few days Then my father went around looking for a non-Jewish family. He found a lady called Katja Kleinburg who had a cafe in the city. I can't do the name of the street at the moment. And she put us up for a few weeks. Now, I'd never slept in a bed before. I'd never drank milk. Never eaten vegetables. To this day, I've slept in beds. I don't drink milk, and I don't eat green vegetables. My friends all know this. When I order food with a salad, the first people to take the salad are my friends. They know I don't eat it. I was speaking at a school one day, and the kid put his hand up, and the question started, he said, "What are your teeth like?" I said, "They're pretty good for an 80-odd bloke." He said, "I'm going to tell my mother I don't want to do that." Mother rang me the next day, told me she wasn't. She was joking, of course. She was telling my son not to drink milk and don't eat vegetables. I'm still here. We were eventually allocated a flat at Hofwijkplein, not far from Holstenspoor again. Of course, there were no windows in those days, so the people living upstairs, downstairs, and we got the centre flat for my brother, myself, and my mother and my father. Now, my parents, I was sent to Switzerland by the Red Cross for a couple of months. So was my brother to recuperate. That's where I really began to live. I couldn't read. Nobody ever told me a good night story. I couldn't add up. I was never any good at school. The school I went to is up the road here called the Nutsveld. I was there yesterday, I looked at it, but it was closed. Now, they nearly kicked me out because I argued with the teachers that 1 and 1 is 3. And I wouldn't believe them that 1 and 1 is 2. I tell my grandchildren now 1 and 1 is 3 and they just laugh at me. So I had none of that background of a normal child growing up to school years. There's some pictures of us after the war. Now, a good thing happened. Best thing happened in my life. Okay. A little sister was born in 1947. It was joy for my family, for my mother, of course, and my father. Unfortunately, my father passed away in 1948. I was 8 years old. My sister was 1.5 years old. And my brother was 13. There's my mother, gone through all the misery of the Holocaust, and the husband, and I was the father. Still died now. Why did he die then? And the doctor said stress. I make the decision. The stress was caused by the Dutch government. I wrote this to the Dutch government, prime ministers, and they answered me. Let's see that later. Because whenever they went to the House of Gemeente, whenever they went to some bureau, there were always excuses why we couldn't get our flat back, why we couldn't get our furniture back, why we couldn't get any compensation, and we had no money and no family. My mother, the Dutch government in those days handed out stamps to the whole population, not just Jews. My mother one day went to the Bijenkorf to buy some dress material, made herself a dress. And in those days, the milkman, the breadman, and all came to the door. The milkman knocked on the door, gave my mother bread, said, "That's a nice dress you're wearing there, Mrs. Boas." And my mother said to him, "Would you like one for your wife?" He said yes. She ran back to the Bijenkorf, made him a dress, got some money, and that's how we started making money. My father went on a bike with a basket at the front to go sell fruit on the Laan van Bedevoort mainly, to make money. When he died, they had plans to go to Australia to immigrate. We were one of the first people to get a visa for Australia. Australia, nobody knows this, well, people do, but they don't want to talk about it, had a quota as to how many Jews would be let into the country in the 1940s. I tell this story in Australia and they can't believe it. They look it up, it's true. So we had one of the early visas when my father died, because my mother wasn't going to leave Holland, and the visa expired. She then decided when there was no life for us in Australia, in Holland. My father had found one relative in the world at that stage and lived in Australia. The sister of my grandmother, my father's mother. My mother decided to go to Australia. That's me looking beautiful. I asked the Dutch, why did all these things happen? Why did it take 28 years to bring out a pension system, this compensation system? Just read through it. Why did it take so long? I've never had a penny from the WIF, from the Dutch government. Not one penny. My brother did, and my mother did. Their reason not giving it to me was I worked too hard. I had 2 jobs, and I was above the limit of what you're allowed to earn. I said to him, do I suffer different than a millionaire? Yeah, it doesn't matter if you've got no money or have money, the suffering is the same. They never wanted to know. And in those days, yeah, I've done well in my life, but that's the those days. I was working hard, I'd been married, had 2 sons, just had a job selling typewriters. Now, you go through all that, Dutch Railways, 2018, the Amsterdam City Council, and as it turns out, the Hague City Council was charging Jews in concentration camp interest and things like that. You know, it's go to the bottom line. And I'm proud to say I had a hand in that, and I'll tell you about that later. The apology that Mark Rudd made on my birthday, my 80th birthday, 26th of January 2020. I was in Sydney Harbour celebrating my 80th birthday when that's 10 o'clock at night, the same day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he apologised at the square in Amsterdam, the Dam Square. That's one of the letters I wrote. I got back from Balkenende in 2009. Basically what this letter said, we could have, we should have done better. Okay, thank you very much. So we get to Sydney, Gucci Beach, that's where we had our first home. We had a flat right down the bottom, there were bad things out there, and we slept on the floor first few weeks. The 4 of us, my mother, my little sister, my brother, and myself. My mother, within 2 weeks, had a job as a cleaning lady at a local hotel. I was sent to school, not too far away, but I had to take buses. I couldn't speak English. I left school at 15 because my mother needed money, I needed money, we had to live. I still said when I'm on the street, that's probably why the school didn't mind getting rid of me. I left school at 15. Never had a proper education. In Holland, in the years 45 to 53, I was at the Nutsveld, and there's a Jewish school in Basingstown. Basingstown? Dave went to Basingstown? Yeah, that's right. For 1 year. So we immigrated to Australia. I spoke no English. School, I got on with the boys. It was a boys' school. I was pretty good at sport. I could run a bit. And in Australia they have a game called rugby league. And those of you who know rugby league, they tell me, it's a very simple game. We throw you the ball, you run fast to the other side. But they don't tell you the big boys will try and knock you out. So I did that game only for 1 year. Worked at radio station 2CH, it's what's called a panel operator, where you have announcers and then you have somebody that plays the records and the commercials. In those days, we're talking 1955. I was there for 6 years. That's me and my mother. 1958. I was selling typewriters then. In 1974, I started to sell elevated typewriters. I was a salesman. I left 2CH where I was earning nothing virtually, but my mother helped pay the rent. I made commissions selling typewriters. My son and I went to a cafe at the central station. We went into a coffee shop and there's a typewriter sitting, a Remington typewriter there, an old one. I said to him, I used to trade those in and give £10 for those. And this was a good job. I made commission. I became a manager of a company that is in direct marketing. My life changed around here. I was in the office one day, I was the sales manager of this company. The phone rings and the man said, is so-and-so there? I said, no, he's no longer here. He said, my name is Larry Choate. And the gentleman over there, we know Larry Choate. And he said, I'm representing the Canadian government selling Olympic coins. I'm looking for somebody in Australia. Could they be interested? If they interested, I said, I will. I went to my bosses. He said, no, we won't do that. I did something which people shouldn't do, but I did anyway. I went over his head to the head office in England, told them the story. They said, go ahead. They made more money out of this one campaign selling Olympic coins than they'd made in the last previous 5 years. I got noticed by the management of the company. In my life came this man because of that. This man's name is Robert Louis Dreyfus. Had a Jewish father, lived a Frenchman. He joined the company that I was working for, an American company called IMS, which was a multinational company with 40,000 employees around the world and in 20, 30 countries. I met him briefly and he became the CEO of the company. He bought the majority shareholdings in the company. His company's name is called the Louis Dreyfus Company. It's a trading company. The story was myself, Shark's brother, myself sent me a story a few weeks ago about the Louis Dreyfus Company. It's the second largest taxpayer in Holland. The owner now is Robert's wife, Margarita, very nice lady. Robert died in 2009. This man came to Australia one day. I just walked over there with a different view. Move my legs. He came to Australia one day. I was invited to a luncheon at an exclusive restaurant, best restaurant I've ever been to up to then. And so I was sitting next to him. He was a big shot being somebody really big in the company and then business in the world. And all the managers, the other 8 or 10 managers were afraid to talk to him. So I knew he was interested in horse racing. So I read that somewhere. And I like horses. And I said, what are you doing tonight? When are you going back to Europe? He said, tomorrow. I said, what are you doing tonight? He said, I said, would you like to go to the races with me? Yes. I rang the committee, got a seat at the boardroom. That man then turned my whole life around. That's the boat that we had coming into Sydney Harbour, the Sivaya. He asked me, he rang me up one day from Singapore. A few months later, he said, can you come to Singapore and have dinner with me? Now, I had no money in those days. He said, I'll buy you a first-class ticket to come to Singapore, come and meet with me. And I did. He then offered me a job in America. I had just gone through a divorce. in those days, 1986, 87, we're talking now 88. And I had nothing to lose and said yes. He then said, I'll give you this job around this house, that's just looking down from my flat in Upper East Side of Manhattan. That's the business that I was put in charge of. I was president of this company. And I'll come back to that in a second. And my wages went up and up and up. I was earning nothing. When I left Australia and I got divorced, I went to live with my mother. God bless her, but it's not easy to live with your mother, I tell you, 50 years old. So I wanted to buy a house or a flat, nothing. And I went to the bank, and the bank said no, they wouldn't allow me to deposit. I got in touch with Robert in France and said, this, Eddy, he said, don't worry, I got the company to guarantee it. That was my first sort of inclination of what could come further up the line. I was then made president of the division of this company, which ended up being owned by Dun & Bradstreet. Most of you may have heard of it, the big American accounting company. And I've traveled the world on his behalf. He sent me to India, he sent me to Brazil to look at companies and ask my opinion if they should buy this company, not buy this company, whatever. One day he rings me, I happen to be in Australia. He said, can you be in Frankfurt on Monday morning? This was probably Friday night. I said, yeah, of course we can. I wasn't going to say no to anything this man said. Well, asked me. Went to Frankfurt, he said, we're buying a company in Holland. And they're giving us a lot of trouble. Will you go to Holland and don't tell them you can speak Dutch and tell us what it's all about? Came to Holland, was met by a good-looking young lawyer who then took me in his car. I'm looking out the window while he's talking in Dutch to staff that put everything away, do this, and he had no idea how to speak Dutch, of course. Got there to the boardroom, they all speaking Dutch. The company that we wanted to pay for was about 40 million. It was a raceway, the company. And they wanted 20 million. And I, listening to them in Dutch, I heard things that I shouldn't have. We didn't buy the company. This young fellow tried to convince me, blah, blah, blah. We never bought the company. So, speaking Dutch did come in handy. Now, I then also got involved in speaking at conferences about marketing. One year, in 1991, the gentleman is sitting over there, Peter van der Busken. Put your hand up, Peter. There he is. And I then invited Peter to join me. And we went to Israel, spoke for the Israeli Post Office to a marketing conference. And we both treated fantastically. That's why I learned to speak and not music. We had a conference business, which my son Philip ran. I was awarded the Marketer of the Year in 1954. I bought a racehorse, I won't bore you with that. That's the trainer. Now, life. And I talk to a lot of schools, and you're not school children, I know. I say to them, life is what you make of it. And as I said before, there are more nice people in this world than there are bad people in this world. Now, I was fortunate after this meeting, Robert Louis Davis, that I went from meeting people down there, as low as I was, to people like Margaret Thatcher. In 1998, we were invited to the marquee at Wimbledon through a connection to a guy called not Murdoch, the other one, Packer, one of the richest men in Australia. And my wife, who's Welsh, my second wife, who's Welsh, loved Margaret Thatcher. Now, I don't know what you do or not, nothing to do with it. She talked to Margaret Thatcher for an hour, and she came away, and I said to myself, I said to Donna, could you ever believe that we to sit down with Margaret Thatcher. I mean, go back a few years. I was lucky to sit down with a German soldier, you know, let alone Margaret Thatcher. So it changed my life. I met the Australian Prime Minister. Then this came in. I then read in the news that Holland was the only country in Western Europe that had never apologised to the Jews. I took it upon myself to see into that. I did a lot of research on it, and it was factual. I wrote a letter to ministers, blah, blah, blah. Same answer, we should have put it on better. Every letter I wrote to the Dutch departments, government departments, insurance companies, I finished with, all I want before I die is an apology. Now, I just want to talk about the insurance companies for a minute. My mother, when the war finished, wrote to certain insurance companies that she knew that her family had insurance policies. She got all negative answers. My brother then took over. He wrote letters to the insurance company. This was now in the 1970s, 1980s. Got nowhere. Now it became my turn. I'd grown up. I was a businessman with a bit of experience. I was writing a book. I wrote to insurance companies. Got one negative after negative. Got back to them. Said, you sure now they've got this right? I got one check for €300 and one check for $30. It wasn't the money. It just proved how much they were lying. My uncle, my mother's, that's why I couldn't have a picture, Jonas, my mother's brother, was murdered in Auschwitz, I think it was. He had an insurance policy I was given from one of the insurance companies, so I wrote back. So what happened to Jonas's insurance policy? You're not mentioning that anymore. They said he cancelled it in 1939. None of us are stupid. Why would a Jew cancel a policy when he knows what's going on in Germany? So I wrote back to them and said, I don't buy that. Prove to me. Send me the certificate. Your records are so great. Send me the certificate. And send me a piece of paper which didn't have a signature on it. But it had another signature on it. So I wrote back to him and said, this is not a valid document, it's not signed by Jonas. They wrote back saying, in those days, the manager of the company could sign on behalf. Why that? I gave up because I was getting older. The energy putting into all of that wasn't worth it. But that's what kind of Dutch. The insurance companies, the banks, they made millions. And as I said, I've written to many Dutch government claims. Nobody ever argued the point with me. So, one day, I'm writing a book, and there's a chapter about Robert Louis Dreyfus in the book. His life story, or his business story, and what he meant to me. He died in 2009. I didn't want to publish the book without getting approval from his family about the chapter, so I sent a copy of the chapter to Margarita, Robert's wife, and she approved it. Then when the book was not launched, when I came here, so Rabbi Katzman the same year, same time, same week, I met with her in London. I said to her, I'm going to be in Holland and London, but I'm happy to come to Switzerland to give you a copy of the book. She said, I'm going to be in London on a certain day. Would you like to go to the ballet with me at the Opera House? Now, me and ballet, I'm not too sure how well they go together. And my wife said, go, but don't fall asleep. I went, met Margarita. She had friends with her. She had a new one-point boyfriend partner. And we went, had dinner and dessert at the Opera House, saw the ballet. I didn't fall asleep. So we at the end of the night, and Margarita said to me, I won't mention names, tell what you want from the Dutch government. I said, blah, 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 I want an apology. She said, so-and-so is a personal friend of Mark Rutt. And he said to me, this man said to me, you write a letter to Mark Rutt, and I will help you write it. And I will personally, Margarita and I, next time we have dinner with him, hand it over. And that happened in January 2018. That's Mark Rutt's reply. I left the names out. He said there, so-and-so handed me the letter. But basically what this letter said, we could have, we should have done better. So I said, thank you very much, Mr. Rutt. Didn't hear from him again till the 26th January 2020, when he publicly apologized for my birthday, Eddy's birthday. And I heard later on. I know there were some rabbis here who also tried to influence this business of getting an apology. Sorted by people in the know. But my had assisted in getting this apology. So I'm pretty proud of it, quite frankly, with you. It should never have been got to that. Holland should have apologized years ago. That's my birthday, that's my mother, my sister, and my mother again, sorry. Just want to do one more thing if you don't mind. Yeah. My mother never spoke about the Holocaust. Still, she was interviewed by the Spielberg Shomer Foundation, who interviewed survivors all over the world. And she wanted me to be there, and my son Philip there to sit with her, otherwise she wouldn't do it. And if you look up the internet and show up potential, you'll find her testimony there. She was a tough lady. She was the person that got us through everything in life. She had no family. She had no husband. It was a very, very hard life. I tried to do my best to look after my mother when I started to make money. I actually brought her out here for her 80th birthday when I was still in New York and paid to meet up with Shark's grandmother. And brought her over here. She died in 2001, and it's the last time I spoke woord Nederlands. Nooit Nederlands gesproken since 2008. So that's why I didn't speak in English tonight. That's my brother, my sister, and myself, my son's family in London, my other son's family in Australia, and my wife. And that's the end of my story. Thank you very much. Any questions, please? Don't be shy. Yes? Can you speak up again?
Did you really own Father?
I'm sorry?
Did you own Father?
No. But there is a headline in one of the newspapers at that time. My horse was called Stony Bay, and it said, the headline said, "Could Fowler beat Stony Bay?" There you go.
Okay.
That's an inside Australian story. Fowler is a horse that was famous. Another question. Another question? Yes?
First of all, thank you so much for coming.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure, especially for young generation. I think also to hear your story and to keep it moving on and also tell it to the next generation. My name is Gad. I'm from Israel and I'm a student here at Eddy University, in Vietnam. And I have a question. How would you recommend in academic circles to keep on remembering and explaining the Holocaust and fighting against deniers or somebody who don't want to actually explain about the Holocaust? What would your personal recommendation be?
Well, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but I can talk. Whether you like my talk or not, that's not the issue. It's hard to find Holocaust survivors today at an age where they can come across to students especially.
Students are very difficult. I did spoke at a university not so long ago, and I've done lots of schools and lots of things. I say that's why I contact ministers, people like that, because none of us survivors are not going to be around for much longer. I'll be one of the youngest at 83. Now, and it's not easy for a lot of the Holocaust survivors to talk about the Holocaust. And I'll be honest with you, and I should have said that at the beginning, I don't remember a thing about the Holocaust. Not one thing. What I'm telling you is what my mother and my brother and my research found out. I used their stories. When I came to Holland, my brother ended up living in Holland. And when I worked in America, I came to Holland just about every month or something. All he talked about was the Holocaust to me, over at lunch or dinner. And then he wrote me letters with stories in it. And I had them all checked out by an investigator. So, according to psychiatrists, and to be honest, I think I'm the last person in the world who needs a psychiatrist, I could put it all in a memory bank at the back of my head. Now, like a lot of survivors, they start talking about it when they go into an old people's home. Will I be one of them? I can't answer that just yet. But coming back to your question, how do you get the education? It's the government. It's got to be the government that forces that. You know, it's one thing happened in Australia just last week. Like everywhere else in the world, there's a lot of anti-Semitism around, especially in the universities and high schools. There was 4 Jewish kids in a high school in Melbourne who got abused year after year, anti-Semitism. Their parents took the education department to the courts, and they won, the parents. And what happened to it because of that, now the education department is responsible for what the headmaster does. You follow what I'm saying? Legally. Because the court case said the Jewish kids were right and the headmaster was wrong. So the education department is where you've got to start here as well. Students got to get together. I know universities are not easy for Jewish students at the moment, but when you see, I'll just touch on anti-Semitism. When you see these people around, these students, as I said a minute ago, I spoke at a university, and the audience, just one Jewish person was there out of 60. And I asked the question, how many Jews are there in the world? Any of you people know? I'm sure some of you do. Somebody might have a guess? I'm sure you do. Right?
At least 2 billion. In the Netherlands.
Seems like it. I'll tell you. 16 million. Now you ask a student, how can 16 million people control 8 billion people? That's the question you're going to ask students. Then they carry on about anti-Semitism. They don't know. They think there's millions and millions of Jews. They control the money. How can 0.002 of the population control the world? You tell me. I'm sure you can't. And neither can the students. The other question I would ask them, and I've spoken, I have asked them, and I asked them that day, how many of you have friends who are in the LGBTY, whatever it is, gay community? Half the audience will put their hand up, if not more. Did you know that Hitler murdered them as well? And they don't know that. Gypsies. And that's why I think the Jewish community should do those sort of things and speak at schools. The leaders of the Jewish community in Australia, anywhere. Go to schools and tell the truth. Yes, sorry, does that answer your question, sort of? Probably a long answer. Sorry, there's a lady there first.
My name is Fanny, and I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. But in Holland, especially in the Hague now, there is an organization which is called Na de Oorlog, which means after the war. And I was trained there, and I'm telling them my parents' story in primary schools. I will go later to secondary schools,
Yeah.
so there are possibilities. Now, I don't know, I haven't heard from this organization that they also go to universities, because universities is one step higher. But I do agree with you that we are not allowed to forget and we should speak. Now, I am second generation. I mean, you at least were in a camp. I have never been in a camp, only visiting Auschwitz, Ravensbrück and Westerbork because that's where my parents were. So I do agree exactly with you, and to you I would say, maybe you get in contact with my director, maybe she can do something. But there are also international organizations, like in the United States, you know, I have been to these congresses, they do a lot, and they specifically look for second and third generations, even third generations, to tell the story of their grandparents, because otherwise nobody will be able to do it.
I offered Jewish organisations here in Holland to speak on their behalf, or speak somehow. They didn't even answer me. You know, so, you know, and similar things go on in Australia, similar things go on and got to be very careful what I say because I'm talking about people I don't know, but I do know them in Australia. These, sorry, Rabbi, leaders, not the Rabbi, these leaders who are not Holocaust survivors, but run these organisations, got to speak up. Send people to schools and tell the truth. Sorry, you had a question?
Yeah. First of all, Eddy, thank you for your touching story. I really appreciate it highly. I've been also writing letters to the Prime Minister, and first I didn't got answers. Now, later I found a way also via to get a letter to him, which he couldn't forget to answer. But the prime reason, and I was also begging for apologies.
Mm-hmm.
And the prime reason of the apology is a deep research and a book by a guy named Rob Bakker, which was published in 2019. The title of the book was in translated the bean counters, the accountants of the Holocaust. And that was about the role of the Dutch government and all the layers below during Second World War.
Yeah.
And that was the prime reason that finally we got an apology.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true, but I knew about all that. They made an apology. I don't care how they did it. They made an apology. That's the whole thing. Mm-hmm. It's the Dutch, in Australia for argument's sake, everybody thinks the Dutch were wonderful to the Jews. Mm-hmm. And then when they hear my story, I get questions, but Anne Frank, well, they read the Anne Frank story, which is a terrific diary and well written by a beautiful girl. And then people say, oh yeah, but they were looked after. But unfortunately, nothing to do with Anne Frank, and the people again in Switzerland totally agree with me because I wrote a blog about it, is the myth is there. You know, it's not her fault that people read it then. Yes?
There's a saying that after the war, everyone will be resistant.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay, that's an early night. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's a late night, actually. And even for young people, it's been a long story. Since you're actually, as some of the people in the audience know, you mentioned the train, the lost train that you were at. There was another one of the other passengers, or another family that was on the train, is the family of Rabbi Forst, who just passed away. He also carried the story with him his whole life. And his mother actually passed away in that train ride. So I would like to present to you, I don't know, you say you don't speak Dutch, do you read Dutch? How's your reading Dutch? A little book compiled by Rabbi Forst about
Dank u wel.
Ja, Joods oud en nieuw.
Nederlands of Holland?
Nederlands, Nederlands. Mooie foto's.
Mooie foto's. Dank u wel.
And then, yeah, a little bit of what's happening in Holland now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you all very much. I enjoyed speaking in Holland. Ik kan naast ook even Hollands spreken. Ik vond het leuk om in Holland te spreken. It was one of my goals and I've achieved it. I'll come back anytime any of the Dutch organizations want me to talk. I don't charge for any speaking. That my books are so, it's all donated to the synagogue. 20 euros. 20 euros. I don't do any of this for money. I do this because of Robert Louis Dreyfus. I can afford to pay my own airfares to come here. So I do this because the story needs to be told. Thank you.
There's refreshments and